Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. How solid is your ear training? If I gave you this solo, could you figure it out in the next 5 minutes? Maybe you're one of the chosen ones with the gift of perfect pitch. The kind of person who can confidently sing in A flat without any reference point. But for the rest of us, mere mortals, who have to actually put in the work to train our ears, it's pretty hard work. And I actually think it's one of the hardest endeavors that any musician will go through. But when you're successful, you'll hear music in a way that you've never heard it before. It's the musical equivalent of when Dorothy's house lands in Oz. She walks out the door having left the black and white world behind, and she's entering a new world where everything is real, vivid, and alive. But virtually everyone I know teaches the same method for ear training, and frankly, I just don't think it's very effective. When I reflect back on the training that I went through, I don't really recognize using any of that in what I actually do today. For the last few months, I've been making short videos here on YouTube where I hit shuffle in my Spotify library, and then I have 60 seconds to play whatever song comes out. And I'm not always successful at it, especially when you guys try to prank me by sticking weird songs in my Spotify playlist, but I think I hold my own pretty well. And for me, this is what the value of ear training is all about. I want to understand what I'm hearing deeply and with confidence. I want to hear everything that the music is giving me melodically, harmonically, tonally, and to understand it so well that I can interact with it. All of this feeds one simple goal for me. Ear training has to be practically useful to me in my career playing music. It has to be more than just an ear training exam in music school. That means hearing something, having confidence about what I'm hearing, letting it come back out through my fingers, into the keys, out the speaker, and into the ears of somebody else nearby. There's no other skill that unlocks your musical potential more than this ability. And with it being so difficult to learn, it's no wonder that there are all kinds of ear training products for sale. And I've bought all of them. I attended 2 universities for music. I've taken online private education from Berkeley and Oberlin. I've taken every online course the market has that I can get my hands on. And honestly, there's a lot of great stuff out there. I've learned a lot from going through them. Except for one scammy super course that was hawked in magazines back all the way before I was born. It was shipped on cassette tapes, and for some godforsaken reason, it's still available for you to purchase online today. I'm not going to name the program. Leave it in the comments if you know. I actually still own a copy of it. It sits on a shelf in that closet over there because my grandmother bought it for me as a gift when I went to music school. And even though I would rather light my house on fire than listen to it again, I can't throw it away because my grandma spent a lot of money on it. Besides, even if I did throw it out, I would just get another email tomorrow from the guy with a limited time offer to purchase his 40-year-old ear training super course. Anyway, as much good as I have gotten out of these resources, virtually all of them teach ear training the same way. All of the courses start with the same interval training exercise. They teach you that for each of our intervals, you associate it with a song that you're familiar with. For example, when I learned this, I connected the tritone interval with the song YYZ by Rush. But depending on how old you are and what your musical taste is, you might pick Maria from West Side Story, or the theme from The Simpsons, or if you're really old, Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun by Debussy, or The Twilight Zone, or The Pink Panther, or Metallica's Enter Sandman. The specific song that you pick didn't matter as long as you picked a song that you knew intimately and that you could recall confidently. Then, when we would sit down to identify an interval, we would listen to it, we would sing it, la la, and then we would figure out what song reference it belongs to. The Simpsons. The tritone. I remember sitting in my dorm room in Toledo, Ohio, trying to decide what songs I wanted to associate with each of the intervals, and I had to do it ascending and descending. And to be totally honest with you, this kind of worked for me for a short time. It helped me enough to pass my tests in music school anyway, and actually I was able to sight sing pretty well too. Re, mi, fa, sol, mi, do, re. But did this actually put me on the path to long-term success playing by ear professionally? Or was this just a way for me to study for the test rather than to study for life? Let's get back to this Killer Rhodes solo from Sean. This solo is from the song Lotus. It's from a neo-soul album called 7 Summers that Sean published a few years ago. See if you can use your song references to transcribe it. Go ahead, I dare you. I'll even give you a start. The first song reference is Yeah by Usher. It is a patently ridiculous idea for anybody to hear this solo, break it down into pairs of intervals, and then identify each interval based on a song reference. I mean, I guess theoretically that you could go note for note real slowly and figure it out. It would take you a while, but I guess you could do it. The first two notes are F and C sharp. That's a minor sixth. And here's the Usher line. It's honestly, it's just silly to think that anybody could play by ear with this method. And yet, I can sit down and play this solo after just hearing it a few times. Why is that? Why is it that I can play this so quickly without going note for note for note? What is it that I hear that others are not? I'm going to show you how I think about this in just a minute, but let me lay some important groundwork first. Are you familiar with solfège? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. I'm a terrible singer, don't mind me. Solfège is often taught to singers and to school teachers as a more practical way to teach sight singing. And of course, I'm talking about movable do. Don't even get me started on fixed do. That is an argument we can have another day. In my observation, solfège gives us a really important and practical improvement over song references. Solfège demonstrates how intervals sound and function differently depending on their context within the key. You can sing so, do, in any key, and it sounds the same. If we keep going, do, re, and re, mi are exactly the same interval. They're both whole steps. But if we play them within the context of the key of E flat, do, re, versus re, mi, they sound totally different. It helps for us to understand that the function of these intervals changes depending on where they live relative to the key center. Here in E flat, check it out. So, do is a perfect fourth. Our do sets the key that we're in, and so is the fifth. It's an authentic cadence, and it takes us from a place of tension into a place of resolution. But then we have re, sol. We're still in E flat. Re, sol. That's a 2 to a 5. This is also a perfect fourth, but this time we end in tension, not in resolution. Despite the math telling us that these two are both perfect fourths, they indeed have very different functions and therefore sound different. If you are a singer or a solo instrumentalist, then this kind of solfège training is going to take you a long, long way. It's definitely worth your time to practice. But for me, as a piano player who thinks a lot about chord movements and other harmonies, this still falls short. In the context of E flat, so, do, and so, do, those are the same thing to me. They're both just 5-1 in different directions. It could either be a perfect fourth up or a perfect fifth down. It's the same thing to me. Even more stupidly, it could be Here Comes the Bride or Flintstones. The idea of using song references for this, while technically and mathematically correct, is almost laughable to me in terms of its practical use. In reality, so is dominant, and its job is to take us home to do. Identifying that musical function by ear is what's really, really important to me. By learning each of the key musical functions that make up our music, we can hear and understand in a much more practical way. So here's our solo again. When I hear this, I try to just make as many observations as I can about what I'm hearing, using my knowledge of musical functions. This is not a linear step-by-step process. I'm kind of taking it all in and trying to absorb and recognize anything that I have the internal knowledge of, that I have the ability to perceive and name. For example, in this solo, I hear that we're in a minor key. After sitting down at the piano, I have figured out that we're specifically in G minor. I don't have perfect pitch. All I did was listen for the root in the recording, G, and then I poked at the piano until I found it. I also hear that the solo is playing over a loop of 4 chords, and I can hear and sing the roots of those chords too. I'm also paying attention to the quality of each of those chords, identifying them as major, minor, dominant, diminished, or half diminished. These are the 5 harmonic sounds that make up basically every song ever written. And so just by hearing the root movement and by knowing my 5 harmonic sounds, I can find the chords to basically every song ever written almost instantly. There are some exceptions for things like slash chords, but honestly, this will get you most of the way there. The solo line is going to be harder though. Our first step is going to be to know it so well that we can sing along with it. And now that I can sing it, I actually hear something else. I can hear that this is basically all just a blues scale. Blues scale is one of those other fundamental musical sounds that make up so much of our music. Seriously, here, take a look. Here's G minor blues. And here's our solo. There are really only a few notes that don't fit the blues scale. I happen to recognize those leftover notes as part of a bebop enclosure around the root. Don't worry about that. It's a more sophisticated thing to hear. If you haven't spent a lot of time playing bebop, you might not hear it. But that's fine. Even if you have to slow down to find those few notes one at a time, you're still way ahead of trying to do this using stupid song references. This actually illustrates something really important, which is that you're going to encounter sounds that you don't recognize now. And because of that, you can't be expected to recognize them. There are going to be gaps that you have to fill in, things like this bebop enclosure. But the more that you do this over time, the more sounds that you gather into your library, the more you're going to be able to do this intuitively. Nothing about ear training is easy. This is actually tremendously difficult and frustrating to learn. But like anything else, the more that you practice it, the easier it's going to get. And it's not actually going to take you that long for you to start to notice some of the same types of musical patterns that come up over and over and over again. We've already talked about one of them. So, do. Gosh, you hear that everywhere. 5-1 is in everything. But there's also this 1-4 secondary dominant movement that we hear all the time in things like the blues and rock and roll. There is a 2-5 and a 2-5-1. These are perhaps the most common chord progressions in all of music. You might be hard pressed to find a song that doesn't use a 2-5. There's also a move from a 1 to a dominant 3 to a minor 6. You hear this a lot in church music and gospel music. There are also tritone substitutions, which are just dominant chords that resolve down a half step instead of going down by a fifth. There's a deceptive cadence to the minor 6. There's what I call the jazz deceptive cadence, which goes to the flat 2 major chord. There are diminished chords that resolve down by a half step. There are diminished chords that resolve up by a half step. This is a lot. But by mastering these sounds and being able to recognize these and everything else that you'll gather over time, you're going to really understand harmonically how your music works. I remember when this first clicked for me. I was in college and I was driving back home for Christmas, and on the radio, I recognized the harmony of one of the Christmas songs. This whole thing just unlocked for me in the moment. I heard the movement. I started on a 4 chord. I heard the third in the melody. Then it went to a 2 chord, but it kept the same melody note on top. Then there was this walk up to the 5 chord, but it wasn't a dominant 5 chord, it was a 5 sus chord. These are all sounds that I had been practicing, and when I got home, I ran into the house, I sat down at the piano, and I played it instantly. A piece of this had just totally clicked for me. This kind of ear training is one of the most challenging and most rewarding skills that you can master. And you should watch this next video because I break down a rather complex set of jazz chords from Jamiroquai's Virtual Insanity, totally by ear, using exactly this process, and we go real slow, step by step, figuring out every single note.